Welcome to the Real Life Buyer podcast. In this podcast, you will hear interviews with business owners, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, authors, and technical specialists in their field. These professionals will hasten your development, accelerate your career, and broaden your business know-how. Now, introducing your host, Dave Barr, interviewing with a purchasing twist.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Life Buyer. Today, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Chris Fuzie, the President-elect and Vice President of the National Leaderology Association and published author of Liminal Space, Reshaping Leadership and Followership. During his career, Chris has amassed over 29 years in law enforcement, leading units as the Homicide and Hostage Negotiation teams, and has now built over 14 years as an owner and senior consultant of CMF Leadership Consulting. Chris brings unmatched leadership expertise. He holds a doctorate in organisational leadership and has dedicated his career to training others in behaviour-based leadership. Today, we'll be diving into how his experience shapes leadership for today's businesses, offering practical insights for SMEs and procurement professionals alike to lead through crises and build resilient teams. So let's get started and welcome Chris onto the podcast. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Dave. Thank you very much.
Absolute
Welcome.
pleasure.
I'm glad to be here.
I'm so good with it. We've managed to finally get time together. And really, it's going to be quite unique talking to you after such a long career in law enforcement. It's going to be, I think, a very different approach to perhaps other leadership people. So, just mentioned nearly 3 decades in law enforcement. Kind of interested to know, certainly for the audience and myself, what have been the pivotal moments and experiences that have inspired you to transition into leadership consulting and academia?
Well, there was this point in my career. I was just about 40 years old, and I saw a couple of my friends, other officers were out, fighting crime in the middle of the night, and a couple of my friends were getting hurt. And so I was like, man, now they don't know what they're going to do. They don't know how to. And so I said, man, I got to do something. And then we're sitting in a briefing one night, and I remember it like it was yesterday. This lieutenant, and I'm just an officer, I'm sitting in the back row, and this lieutenant he says, if any of you are willing, wanting to get anywhere in your career, and he kind of leans aside and he looks straight in the back towards me. And he says, you need to start working on your education. And it was like he shot a bullet, went right into my head, bounced around there for, and he made me really think about going back to school, getting my education. And so at 40 years old, I said, okay, I only have a PhD, public high school diploma. That's all I had. And I said, I need to go back to school. And I talked to my wife about it. Went back to the junior college right here. And, sitting in class, 40-year-old seasoned cop. And I'm sitting in a classroom with 18, 19-year-olds that have no clue about what's going on. And that's what started me on this path. So I finished that AA degree. And I said, well, I got to keep going. So I looked at the bachelor's degrees, and there's a local college that had the organizational leadership. I thought, okay, if I get hurt as a cop, if I can't do this, then at least I can use that. That sounds like something that could be used anywhere. So I'll do that. So I went into that program, started seeing all this stuff, all these leadership theories, all of these, all that stuff coming up, and realized that that's what was happening within my own organization. So I started paying attention to what was going on in school, started learning that, and then seeing that that's what was happening. So I finished the bachelor's degree, and I went immediately into the master's degree. And I said, this is good stuff. I mean, you could really see the use. It was like going to work was like having my own little petri dish of let's try some of this stuff out. So that's how I got into it. And it just blossomed from there with them getting the doctorate, going from there. But yeah, it was that one guy who leans around the corner, looks at you square in the eye and says, you need to do this. And that was it.
That's a fantastic lesson that you can really get the bug for learning at any age. And just one influence was enough to set you on this path. It's quite fascinating. Right. The other thing I find quite interesting, or would love to hear from you is you're in a classroom, as you mentioned, with a lot of young people, and you are a little bit older than them, say, certainly been out in a career, and a career that probably is quite influential in itself.
Yeah.
How did they take to you? How did they react to you in the classroom?
They didn't take it because the students not as much as the instructors, because I was challenging the instructors. I had one instructor that, and we had maybe 3 or 4 of us that had been in this classroom. There was a couple people that were also there from other law enforcement agency. And I had this instructor in a sociology class telling me that men are not victims of domestic violence. And I said, well, yeah, they are. And she goes, no, men cannot be victims of domestic violence. And so I go, how do you tell the instructor you're wrong and, still be polite? Yeah. But I told her that's, so I just said it. I said, well, you're wrong. I just arrested a lady the other night for domestic violence. So it was hard because a lot of the theory in some of these courses, not so much the leadership courses, but, sociology and then the math and history and some of these other things, some of the theories and stuff don't add up. And if you don't have life experience, then you're just going to accept whatever the instructor says. And so I didn't accept whatever the instructor says. And a lot of the students they would talk with you, talk with me about some of these things, and I'd explain to them why. And so it was interesting because it wasn't just sit there and learn and do the homework, and you really had to discuss stuff and sometimes show people that they're wrong.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the best learning experiences is hearing stories from other people. As you say, real lived experiences. I've done it. It's not a case it's come out of a book or off Google. You've been there and got the T-shirt, so to speak. Right. And nobody can argue with somebody who has been through not just one, but probably multiple examples of these things. Right. And I said, I think you learn far more from people in that context than ever from a book. Would you agree with that?
I'd agree with that 100%. Yeah, absolutely. Because and those experiences, we're observational learners. And so when somebody says, this is what happened, this is how it happened, and you can ask them questions about it, they can clarify or show you or whatever, then that's way more important than, here's a theory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So obviously, you've got a unique lens on leadership, certainly from a very different position to many people. So how do high-stake leadership lessons from your police work, especially in units like hostage negotiations and homicide, that's quite astounding to be involved in that, how do they translate to the leadership challenges faced by small business owners today? Particularly now it's quite tough in an economic environment, and they may well have an operational crisis to deal with as well.
Yeah. So one of the things from law enforcement is that you plan for different possibilities. So I always tell people, look, you have the possibilities and the probabilities. You have to plan for possibilities, but you react based on the probabilities. And so same thing for small businesses is that, you can see what's there. You can see the possibilities or what could be happening, but you still need to plan on the probabilities of market share, what's happening with the economy. We're talking about the election, all that stuff is going to drive people were already day one with the election. They're talking about getting their attorneys together because something's going to happen with the stock market. Okay. So you still have to plan for the probabilities or possibilities, but act on the probabilities. Same thing in law enforcement is that there's all sorts of, you always have a backup plan or start with a backup plan. And then if that backup plan goes sideways, then you start with another one. One of the best analogies I can give is that when we would get a high stakes situation, a hostage situation or a SWAT situation or something like that, we'd get in the command trailer, and this command trailer, the walls were just their dry erase walls. The whole wall was a dry erase wall. And we just start writing on the walls what options you have. And there's always one option, do nothing, And so that's the first one I would write. Okay, what if we do nothing? And then you go from there and you start looking at all these options. Well, what if what if we got this person to come out? What if we didn't get this person to come out? Is the person, is the hostage still alive? How do we know the hostage? So you start planning all these things. And the more you can think of different possibilities, then the more flexible you're going to be when the probabilities show up. So yeah, that's one of the things. And it's not a matter of saying this is my plan, we have to follow this plan. Let's see if that plan is we've erased entire plans.
Yeah.
And we just go with, okay, well, here we go. Or, you get ready and you start to have something ready, and then the person walks out and goes, okay, I'm done. It's like, wait, we had this great plan. We're going to come in.
Brilliant.
Okay, I guess we're done.
It's obviously in your situation, in quite a few situations, things change dramatically. And there's only so much planning you can do, particularly when you've got a short timeline. Yeah. And no matter what you do planning wise, somebody's going to do something different to what may be expected. People
Correct.
Don't tend to follow logic all the time.
Right.
So from a leadership perspective, where you have responsibilities for people that are alongside you, how do you ensure that the decisions you make are kind of the best decisions under the pressure that you're under at that time?
I have to preface it by saying sometimes you just don't know. You try to make the best decision for everybody. You try, like in a tactical situation, knowing where your other people are at, knowing what the target is, knowing, all of that. Sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen. That was one of the first books I wrote. It's called Because Why, and it's called Because Why: Understanding Behavior and Exigencies, because you really don't know what people are going to do all the time, especially when somebody feels that their life is in danger, or the fear that their life is in danger, whether it is actually or not. That's what COVID did to all of us. We all had that, oh my God, we're all going to die. No, not necessarily. I still don't understand the whole why we stock up on toilet paper thing. I'll never get that. But that's what the Because Why book was about, is that there's factors there, like what's somebody's thought process? What is the time factor? What is their perception of time? Do they feel they have that amount of time? And so all of this stuff goes into play at the time as things are unfolding. Well, then later on, if you try to evaluate that, you may not know why those things have happened. In one of my personal incidents, I remember I'm holding on to this guy. I'm fighting with this guy, and I'm trying to keep my gun back here so he can't get me. And I could hear everything he was saying, but I couldn't hear the alarm that was like 5 feet from my head. And how does that happen, right? So, we can explain how it happens, but those are the kind of things that you don't know what's going on. You don't know what's going through that person's mind. Or sometimes you don't even know what you're thinking. And some of those thought processes are really crazy. At one point, like fighting with this guy, I'm looking at him, and just before, I was making the decision whether I'm going to shoot him or not, I just kept thinking he's about the same age as my son. 21, 22 years old. He's about the same age as my son. He's got a dad. I'm sure he's got a dad. What would his dad think if I killed him? Those kind of thoughts go through your head, and it all that influences the decision-making process. And so you don't know what's going through somebody's head, and you try to make the best decision possible based on the circumstances as they present. It'd be nice if you could look miles down the road and say, yes, I know what's going to happen. And if we all had a crystal ball, we wouldn't, we'd be great. But we don't have that. And so you try and do the best thing possible in the circumstances.
Yeah. And something that's just occurred to me from a point of view of the team that you have under your command. How essential is it for you to fully understand their thought process, their behaviors, their values, how they will react in certain situations? Because I guess you have to know them fairly intimately as well when you're in that kind of situation.
Yes, yeah, and the personalities, values, all those things come into play. Their experience level, all of that comes into play when you work with your team, and you have to have that because you're going to position people in a certain spot. There was one incident where we had a guy in a house with a gun, and we're making an approach. And we had a brand new reserve police officer, and she was positioned next to not a big tree, but a kind of little tree. She's a fairly small person, so she could kind of hide behind this little tree. But from where I was, I could see that she was backlit, and you could see her clear, wow. Just like putting a spotlight on her.
Oh dear!
And then. So I saw her, and I told one of the other officers, I said, get her out of there, move her to some other spot. Just right after she moved, our guy had gone out the back, somehow gotten past the guy we had in the alley, and had come around and stopped right at that spot where she was. And he had a loaded gun with him. And so we ended up turn around and take him down at gunpoint and all that, and he gave up and everything. But it could have been him approaching her from behind, and those kind of things that you just do it based on that. And I knew she was inexperienced, I knew she was brand new, but I also knew that was not a safe place for her, so we moved her. And those are the kind of things that you have to think about. You have to know your team, you have to know what their capabilities are, what they do and don't know, that kind of stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. Another thing that's just sort of dropped into my mind is scenario planning. We talked about planning on a whiteboard is one thing. How critical do you think business owners should be not just scenario planning on a whiteboard, but actually engaging in an activity as if something really happened? I guess in your case, you have to undergo real life situations, but obviously in an acted scenario. How critical is that to do those things time and time again to get people familiar with how to behave in certain situations?
So let me see if I understand your question. Is the scenario planning, how important is that for business people?
But actually to do it, because I think it's easy for people to plan on a whiteboard, but you see the TV and you see police on the TV actually undergoing physical activities as if a scenario was taking place.
Right.
How often or how important do you feel it is for business owners not to do things on the whiteboard, but let's actually do an activity, like a fire drill. Everybody goes out and does a fire drill as if it was going to happen. What about in other business situations?
Yeah, absolutely. So in those crisis situations, when we do it on the whiteboard, that's just because we don't have time to do everything else. But let's say we're going to do another operation. We fill out an operational plan. And it gets reviewed by everybody. You go through I go through these plans and say, okay, well, let's move this, let's change that. And so that's where business owners, people should be looking at, what is your business plan? What happens if I keep going back to the election thing because that's still huge in the news here. What happens if this person gets elected? What happens if this bill passes? How are you going to how are you going to change your business? What new laws? Every year we get new laws about business stuff, and you should be looking at, okay, here's the new laws. This is what I need to do, and writing that stuff down. Every year, if you revise your business plan every year based on what's happening, now it's a living document, just like your organization is a living organization, and you can keep going with that.
Yeah.
So I think it's important. It's really important to keep that idea. You're not, if nothing changes, everything else changes.
Yeah. Because people often think of business planning in 3, 4, 5 year cycles, but the reality is things can change overnight. It's the important thing is to keep reviewing, as you said, keep reviewing that plan in light of what's actually happening around you, not in the pretense that things are going to be the same in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. Even just one supplier. Okay, let's say you have one supplier for all of your utensils that you give out in your restaurant or whatever. what if that supplier's business goes out? Now, do you have a plan ready for where you're going to get other utensils? So you need to have those kind of things ready and have that backup plan. Have, at least, okay, well, what if this? What if that? And sit there and what if it, maybe just you and a couple key people in your organization, just sit there and what if, and say, okay, well, what if this happens? It makes you that much more prepared, and you're ready for if something happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, you're involved in leaderology. It's not something that I think we've heard of a lot of over here.
Or at all.
Or even at all. So
Right.
I'd love to understand, what as a very simplistic way of explaining it, and from that, what kind of actionable steps can business owners use in that science-based study of leadership?
So let's explain leaderology in the first place. Leadership studies is, all these colleges have leadership studies. We do all this, Well, if you're a sociologist, you study sociology. If you're a biologist, you study biology. And we have all of these ologies, which is the studies of the science of whatever. You even have mixology for people who are bartenders. So, okay. So what we were talking about, what we did, this guy named Dr. David Robinson, he called me one day and we were talking about this, and he goes, I got this idea, and this thing is, leaderology. And I said, it just sounds fake. But when you think about it, leaderology has to do with the actual scientific study of leadership. And so you look at what's happening in a lot of coaching and mentoring, that kind of thing. You may get a coach. You hire somebody who says, I'm a leadership coach. Well, they may have had a great floral shop for 30 years, and they've been able to be successful with their floral shop. How are they going to help you in your mechanic shop, right? Well, it's different. Or in your yard work company or whatever it is. Yeah, how are they going to help you? And in coaching, the idea is to just ask a lot of questions and let the client find their own. Well, they can do that on their own. But with leaderology, we take the science of leadership, and to be a leaderologist, you have to have at least 2 degrees in leadership, either master's and bachelor's or doctorate, whatever. So you have some formal training in leadership and leadership theory. And what the National Leaderology Association does is we verify that the people that you would hire are leadership trained. So when you come to me and you say, hey, I don't know what's going on with my organization, I can go in there and I can look at it and I could say, well, let's say you have a socialization and a cohesion problem. Well, what does that mean? Well, an untrained coach is going to ask you, well, how do you get these people together? What are you going to do? Let's have a party. But there's actually 7 different things you can do. And so if you know what those 7 different things you can do are to build cohesion, let's say, then you can start implementing those 7 different things, and not just let this person flounder on their own and keep paying you hundreds of dollars to ask them questions. So the industry of leadership coaching is very, very unregulated, and it's very open, and you could get almost anybody to be a coach. And so what we're trying to do with the National Leaderology Association is say, these people are verified leaderologists. They know their stuff as far as leadership. So these are the ones that you want to help you. So that's in essence what it's about.
Okay, you've got to be intrigued about the seven things that people need to understand.
Yeah.
Can you give us a brief snapshot of those 7 things?
Okay, so STICK'em, STICKUM, right? Sacrifice. Okay, so some kind of personal sacrifice that you would make for the team, not the company making for the team. You personally make for the team. That it almost goes along that servant leadership role. where you are being the servant leader for somebody else. You're sacrificing your time, your effort, your whatever. So that's one. People recognize that, and they'll say, okay, hey, if he's willing to do it, then let's all get together. Interaction. I'm talking about forced interaction. So sometimes people don't want to work together, and I had this probably 2 months ago. You have two people who sit right next to each other. Their backs are kind of to each other, and one would hear the other one talking on the phone with the husband, and when the other one didn't like it, and so finally I call them in a room. I go, look, you don't have to like each other. You don't have to be best friends. You don't have to go to tea. You don't have to go to coffee, but you do have to work together. Your communication needs to be clear. It means 3P: professional, polite, productive, and appropriate. That's what needs to happen. But you have to force that interaction. And then the C is for competition. So create some kind of competition between different units or different people. So if you can do that, then that's gonna help people. People kind of rally around a competition. Look at football, right? So you get two teams, and people say, hey, no, this is my team, this is my team. So you create some kind of competition there, and that helps people become more cohesive. Because just watching a football game, 40,000 people in the stands, and they're all cheering for the same thing. It's amazing. So that's and then Stickum, you go through the whole thing, but that's kind of a snapshot of how Stickum works, and that's specifically for cohesion.
Brilliant. Okay. Now, obviously, given your role in training leaders, what do you feel are the most overlooked aspects of leadership development? What would you say that people should be particularly looking at when leading and working within cross-functional teams?
Followership is I think one of the most overlooked aspects of leadership, because and I don't think we look at it correctly. That's what the liminal space book is about, is that we don't think about leadership or followership as a part of the process of leadership. So you have the three parts of leadership, which is a leader, a follower, and some kind of situation. You take away any one of those three, and you don't have a process. So when you're talking about cross-functional teams, first of all, you have to understand your teams and your people, and they need to know that maybe at one point they're in the lead, and then the next whatever, they're not in the lead. They're a follower, but they still need to do what they need to do to achieve the common goal. And so, yeah, that's one of the biggest things, is that we don't think of followership as important. And when you think about it, let's go back to the football game. You think about it, you have however many players, what is 12, 15 players on the field, whatever, right? But you have 40,000 people in the stands. Who has the most ability to get something done? If the 12 players or 15 players decided they want to pull down the goalpost, maybe not going to happen. If those 40,000 people decided they want to pull down a goalpost, it's going to happen. And so we don't think of the power of followership and how we can use that. If we could harness some of the things, and I always think about this when I watch sport, if we can harness the power of that group of fans there to do one thing, we'd be so much better off.
Getting followers, people think about, obviously, social media. I think it's perhaps in a strange context in some ways.
It is.
How do you feel? What do you think are the attributes of a person, a leader, that really helps to engage people to follow them, that is different from, say, the usual management style of leadership? What's the difference between the two?
That's a good question, because there's like 86 different behaviors that I've been able to identify with people, that they're all good. They're all possible. Every behavior can be functional or dysfunctional. And the ones that get people to follow them, I can't even say that, because even in a criminal street gang, it's some of the same behaviors, but it's for a malevolent purpose, So, out of these 86 behaviors, I'm going to just look at it. So you have things like emotional control, empathetic, empowering, honest, integrity, intelligent, lead by example. I mean, all of those are things that people say we want in our leaders. Problem solving, self-motivated, share success, teachable. These are all things that people say we want in our leaders, but it works with good groups as well as bad groups. Yeah. So it's hard to say, because leadership is leadership, and what the goal is part of the context. And so you get somebody who's very good at leading a criminal street gang. They might be just as good at leading some kind of financial planning corporation.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is dependent on the context in which they're leading.
Yeah.
If you have a situation where the context where you need somebody who's very decisive, wants to get, something that you have to do, like the police work stuff, right? But then that type of leadership wouldn't work if you're talking about creating a schoolyard or a new school setting. You're going to want to have collaboration. You're going to want to have input from everybody else. You're not going to be able to just go in and say, this is where we're putting the monkey bars. This is where we're putting, you can't just do that.
Yeah. How important do you think is the term charisma in leadership? Is that something that can be taught?
I think it's not very important. And the reason I say that is in our survey, it came out second to the last out of 86 behaviors. And when you think about charisma, you have these very charismatic kind of people that go out there, but then a lot of times they're just talking. They're just mouthing and repeating something else. And the people who are actually doing the thinking are the introverts, the ones who are sitting behind the scenes, and they'll sit there and they'll think about something for a couple of days before they make their decision. I've worked with very charismatic leaders, and they're a lot of fun to be around, but their decisions aren't usually the best.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, I'm quite fascinated to now ask you, what would you say were your top 2 leaders, and why would you say for you are they at the top of their game?
Top 2 leaders? You mean actual people that I know?
Hopefully, well, at least are aware of. Right. So if you're going to put 2 people on a pedestal to say, this is the epitome, in my opinion, of someone who has nailed leadership, who would they be and why?
Wow. I had a sergeant, his name was Ron Chandler. And Ron was the kind of person that he just kind of understood who you were. He would come talk with you, just grab a cup of coffee and go sit and talk. And then, but when there was problems, there was issues and problems, he's the kind of person that he understood where you were and took care of you. So I'll give you an example. At one point, I was going through a divorce. Cops, we all go through divorces. So I'm going through a divorce, and I was really, really not in a place where I needed to come to work and try to deal with other people's problems. And I showed up at work, and he met me at the back door of the department. He goes, "Hey, Chris, I got a job for you to do tonight." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I need you to take these 2 cars, and I need you to put miles on them. We need to get these to have some miles on them." He says, "All I want you to do is drive these cars up and down the freeway, put some miles on these." But he knew that I couldn't be out dealing with other people's problems. I just went through my own issues at home with my ex, and now I'm going to go out and handle, domestic violence problems or this. He said, no, he understood that. And he said, and he took care of me. He changed what I needed to do that day. And it put a burden on him. There was another one, Doug Winfrey. Doug Winfrey he was a lieutenant, and one night and he was just a good guy. You never heard him cuss. He never cussed. I don't know how people can do that, but he never cussed. And so one night I'd been in court all day, and I was working graveyard, and I came in and I said, "Hey, LT, I need to have some time off. I've been in court all day. I'm not gonna." He goes, "No," he says, "we're down to minimums. I need you to be here." Oh man, okay. So he says, "Well, go out and if you get to a point where you're really tired or you need, just give me a call." Okay. So I tried to make it about 2 hours, And I stopped. At the time, we didn't have cell phones, so I stopped at a phone booth, and I called him. I said, "Hey, boss, it's really getting bad. I'm about ready to fall asleep. I stopped because I don't want to crash the car, And he says, "Okay, well, where are you at?" So I tell him where I'm at, and he says, "Stay there. I'll be out in a minute." So he comes out, and this is midnight. He comes out, and he brings me a cup of coffee. Well, I'm right here by a 7-Eleven. I can get my own coffee, but okay. So he brings me this cup of coffee. He says, "Drink that. And then what I want you to do is drive down to the police department, put a couple chairs together in the basement, and lay down and try and get a little bit of sleep. And I'll have the station officer wake you up in a little while." Okay. So I drive down to the police department, put some chairs together. As soon as I lay down, I'm out. And then next thing I know is the station officers tap me on the foot saying, "Hey, Chris, time to get up. The lieutenant said for you to get up." So I wake up and I realize it's 7 o'clock in the morning. And it's like, oh man, I run upstairs. And as I run upstairs, the lieutenant's coming in. He hands me 2 reports, a couple tickets, and a field interview card. He did my job. He worked my beat. And so I go, "Hey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sleep that long." He goes, "No, that's good. It was good for me to get out and see what it's like to be a good cop again." And, so he took care, again, take care of your people.
Yeah, that's a great lesson there. They're obviously very astute. They're empathetic. They understand, as you say, and then they put themselves in that kind of position.
Yeah.
As you said, supported you directly. So that's an incredible 2 stories to share there. That really, really is good. Keeping an eye on the time, there's 2 more questions I want to ask you.
Okay.
Firstly, there's an awful lot of change going on in this world. It's a little bit crazy at the moment, and organizational change is inevitable.
Yeah.
And certainly small business owners, even large business owners, have to deal with the challenge of managing teams through a change. And also, often those changes can be positive, but they can also be demoralizing for various reasons. So what kind of strategies would you recommend for guiding teams through that kind of transition without losing their morale or their productivity? What's your thoughts on that?
So with teams, you have the 3 parts of the teams. You have task, relationship, and structure. And so you don't want to change the relationship. That's the morale part. That's the part where that's the important part. The task, it depends on your company or your culture or whatever your organization does. So then you focus on the structure. Do we maintain the same structure? In the liminal space book, I talk about using a different type of structure, whereas it's not a hierarchical structure. It's more of looks like kind of a snowflake even, where you have triangles, squares, and hexagons, and each one of those has to do with different behaviors. So if we try to keep the same structure when everything else is changing, it may not work, right? So we have to think about being flexible, being more agile, changing the structure of what we're doing. And sometimes that means changing a person, and you may have to change a couple people, but the goal should be maintain those relationships, the relationship part, because the task is probably not going to change. You're in business for a reason, to do something. So the task is probably not going to change. And if the task does change, that's fine. That's part of what you're doing. But then also look at where you're at in that team development and try to keep pushing towards the performance, the high performing teams. And it's okay to have discourse. We don't all have to get along. A good team will fight, and they'll have these knockdown dragouts and then when it's all done, they all come out and say, "Okay, let's move on." And so don't be afraid of that, but be ready to be flexible. That something has to change. And like I said before, if everything else changes, if you don't change or one thing doesn't change, everything else changes around it. I mean, just think of a piece of metal, how it rusts, even though everything is right. So, you have to be ready for that change.
Yeah.
And structure is the best part.
Yes, it's always a difficult one. People are naturally adverse to change.
Yeah.
And particularly when it affects them personally. And it can be quite a difficult thing to deal with, especially when you're talking about structural changes in companies. Their responsibilities change, their goals, the values and beliefs need to change in line with what's happening in the market. And some people can do that. Some people, prefer to hit the exit button and find somewhere else that fits more with them.
Right. Yeah. And change is all fear-based. I shouldn't say that. Resistance to change is all fear-based. Individual fear, and then team fears. What's going to happen to our team? We have and then organizationally, those are all fear-based.
It's quite interesting because sometimes change can be exciting, but we always naturally tend to think of the fear side of things, of how it could negatively affect us. What's the way you can affect change where people get excited and looking forward to the change, because it could be a whole new wonderful experience?
That's where you have to allow enough time for them to assimilate that, build a vision that they can see. You don't just talk about it make a picture. Here's a model of what this building's going to look like. Here's what I see as far as, we'll all be able to do this. And people want that they want new stuff, but they also have to have time to assimilate that and think about what this is going to do. Well, if we do this, then this will be better. And if we do that, then, so we have to have time to let them do that. But if you can paint that picture that people see the vision, and that's why we always talk about visioning and vision, if people can see your vision, your way, then that's where you're going to really get people excited about the change, because then that's when they get on board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's the perfect thing I was looking for is the vision must excite people, and they must see themselves in that picture and how much better they're going to be as a result of it, isn't it?
Right.
Personalize.
Yeah. The people that are whiffum people, what's in it for me? Those people, they're going to be some of the first ones on board if you can paint that picture for them.
Yeah. I think that natural excitement from others then helps the rest of the, call it the group, the team, or the herd, to say, hold on a minute, they get influenced by that and the excitement, and they get dragged along by it in some cases.
Right.
Now, before I ask my last question, how could people learn more about you, what you do, find out about, some great lessons that you share?
Well, you can look at my website, which is www.cmfleadership.com. CMF is for clear, meaningful focus, but it's just too much to write. cmfleadership.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Facebook. I don't look at Facebook that much, but I'm on there, and then Twitter or X, so those kind of things. But the website is actually the best because it has a contact page and explains kind of what we do and why we do it. Yeah.
Fabulous. Okay, my last question. You've recently released your book, Liminal Space.
Yeah.
Now, if you're going to share a few top tips for business owners with limited resources, what tips would they be to help them improve their leadership skills and competence, and perhaps even their businesses as a result of that?
Let's see, top tips. So the first one would be learn as much as you can. The leadership is not just by gut reaction. Leadership is a science. And so just like I shared with the cohesion, you have the same thing with cohesion, the same thing with socialization, learning about your people. Team structure has two different sides to it, where cohesion's on both sides. So you have to know how that works. So if you really want to increase your leadership, learn about your people, and then understand how some of these theories, some of these scientific things actually work, and you can put them together. And that may mean, getting a hold of a leaderologist. That may mean getting a hold of somebody who actually does know how to, not just someone who's going to ask you question after question after question until you say, okay, well, I think I'm where I want to be and I'm done. So that's what I would say is, knowing your people is the first thing, because situationally, that's what's going to help you take care of things in any team or any individual
absolutely.
setting.
Yeah.
Right.
I totally agree. And understanding where your team are, the things that they like, their values and behaviors, the alignment with each other and the business, all critical. And I totally am on board with you about continual learning, because some things you'll learn today, you can apply tomorrow.
Right.
And you can see which works best for you. If you do the same things day after day, you're probably going to be pretty well static for the rest of your career. And your business probably will be as a result of that too.
Right. Yeah, you have to be ready for change. You got to be, and as things change, go along with it.
Absolutely. Well, it's been fascinating talking to you today, Chris. I could probably spend another couple of hours or two if given the chat, but we're effectively out of time. Again, thanks for sharing all the information. I really encourage people to obviously look out for your book. I'll put links to it in my posts. And all I can say is thank you for doing the things you do and for helping people become better leaders in business today.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate you giving me the chance to tell some stories and help people also.
Thanks.
A lot of fun. Thank you.
So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it, and it has given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes, and a 5-star review would be most appreciated. If you would like to discover more about me and what I do, take a look at www.thereallifebuyer.co.uk. Bye.